They moved under darkness. 48 trucks, no lights, no plates, just silence and the weight of $700 million worth of war. On the night of August 19th, something unprecedented crossed into Burkina Faso. Not a border dispute, not a rebellion, but a full-scale mobilization cloaked in the garb of agriculture. Hidden beneath sacks of rice and marked aid supplies were crates of rifles, rocket launchers, jamming devices, and explosives potent enough to level buildings. No news outlet reported it, no official raised an alert. But one man did not sleep, Captain Ibrahim Traore. Before the first shot could echo, he moved. Before the first blood could spill, he gave the order. The ambush was set, the convoy was stopped, and what his forces discovered would ripple across Africa, shaking capitals from Abidjan to Addis Ababa. What happens when a nation refuses to be silently dismantled? And who dares challenge a billion-dollar plan to replace Africa's leaders like pawns on a board? Stay with us, because this is more than a crisis. This is the moment the old plans burned and something new began. And if you believe stories like this should be heard, subscribe now, because Africa's future will not be written in whispers. It began with a whisper, 3 syllables from a captain staring into darkness. Something's wrong. At exactly 3:47 a.m. on August 19th in the quiet outpost of Canary, near the border with Togo, Captain Musa Kabor spotted what shouldn't have been there. Through the chilled lens of a thermal scope, he saw shapes, massive, rolling, heat signatures in motion. Trucks, dozens, moving silently, no lights, no plates. They weren't taking the main road. They were weaving through a dirt track, deliberately skirting the official checkpoint. "How many?" came the voice through the comms, dry and alert. 48, Kabor replied. Steady, calm, too calm. "Midnight convoy, no flags. Doesn't look like aid, sir." 8 minutes later, in the capital, Ouagadougou, the president of Burkina Faso was already standing. Ibrahim Traore, soldier, strategist, and sentinel, stood in the dim glow of the National Strategic Command Center. His eyes fixed on a red-lit satellite feed, he spoke without raising his voice. "Call Zerbo. Scramble special units. Get the drones airborne." Then, jaw clenched, he added, "Intercept. Not one round must go astray." 2 UAVs launched silently from Base Zongo, slicing across the southern sky. On the ground, 2 elite commando units moved through scrub and dry terrain. No headlights, no chatter. Just fingers curled on triggers, feet sinking softly into dust. Why now? Why so many trucks? And why the secrecy? The answers were locked in steel crates, hidden beneath tarp and lies. At precisely 4:06 a.m., the convoy reached a fork near Canaliba. From the surrounding hills, floodlights snapped on. Laser sights flared red in the dark. No shots were fired. The trucks halted. The drivers froze. One man tried to reverse. He didn't make it 10 feet. Then, one by one, the tarpaulins were lifted. The first truck was marked agricultural machinery, but inside, dark green ammunition crates. A bolt cutter snapped the first lock. No one spoke. The lid creaked. Inside, brand new AK-47s, untouched. Next to them, M16s in foam casing, launcher tubes wrapped in oilcloth, boxes of grenades, pouches of 7.62 millimeter rounds sealed in plastic. The second truck, identical. The third, worse, radio jammers, tactical vests, RPGs. The fourth, fifth, sixth, not one was empty. Inside the National Strategic Command, a secure call came through from General Zerbo. "You need to hear this yourself," he said, his voice controlled but tense. The phone was passed to President Traore. "Sir," said Captain Kabor, voice crisp, direct, "this isn't aid. It's a mobile armory, a rolling army." There was no hesitation. "Detain every driver," the president ordered. "Lock the perimeter. I want answers. Who funded this? Who coordinated it? Where were they going?" He turned to his intelligence chief. "Start tracking plate numbers, SIM logs, routes. I want a map of every origin within 2 hours." He stared again at the satellite map of Canary. "This isn't smuggling," he said slowly. "This is mobilization. But for whom?" In minutes, special forces had cordoned off the Canaliba route. Tactical drones flew overhead, infrared scanning for irregular movement. A mobile interrogation unit was deployed. One by one, the drivers were separated and questioned. "What's in the cargo?" "Farming tools, sir. That's what we were told." "All 48 trucks?" "Yes, sir. Picked up from separate depots." "Who gave the order?" "I don't know. I was paid to drive." That was the pattern, same answers. Different faces. No one seemed to know the full journey. Different origins. Different timing. Then just before the border, they all came together. Had the chaos been orchestrated on purpose? President Traore ordered full satellite archive access for the past 48 hours. The data was chilling. The convoy's vehicles had converged only 1 hour before the crossing, each from a different province, different license plates, fake manifests, and ghost clearances. Then came a deeper discovery. A briefcase of sealed dispatch logs arrived. The internal surveillance commander placed them on the table. "Sir," he said grimly, "none of these vehicles passed through official customs. No corridor, no clearance. They moved like ghosts." A tech officer added, "Many trucks switched SIM cards 24 hours ago. That's not local smuggling. That's military-grade evasion." Outside, the night was giving way to dawn. But inside the war room, the real battle was just beginning. A single question now hung above every map, every intercepted radio log, every crate. Who has the power to arm a hidden army worth hundreds of millions right under Africa's nose? But what they found in the registration logs shocked even the cyber team. The trucks were just the surface. Beneath the crates lay something deeper: coordination. At daybreak, the National Intelligence Division activated its full capabilities. President Traore had made one thing clear. This isn't a crime. This is a campaign. Within hours, satellite archives from the past 48 hours were reviewed. Each truck's GPS shadow, route variants, and manifest inconsistencies were mapped. The results were staggering. 48 vehicles, all departing from different depots, some as far as Gawa, others from Dori, a few from border-adjacent farms, converging within an hour window, just before crossing into Canary. None of their plates matched registered numbers. Several were cloned. Worse, a forensic cyber team found that at least 17 vehicles had switched SIM cards using military-grade encryption, completely undetectable by civilian networks. Traore folded his arms in silence. "This isn't guerrilla chaos," General Zerbo remarked. "This is imported precision." The forensic teams then turned to the crates. Serial numbers, some deliberately scratched, others erased, were analyzed using particle imaging, micron scanning, and infrared tracework. The results shook the room. One set of codes matched post-war Libyan stockpiles, specifically Saba, a known depot of unregulated armament following the 2011 NATO operation. Another batch of weapons, RPGs and encrypted tactical gear, matched exports tracked to Taiz, Yemen, smuggled via Gulf routes. But it was the third batch that changed everything. Factory-fresh rifles, untouched, still in manufacturer foam. Their codes matched a weapons plant in southern Europe, last audited by NATO compliance teams in 2023. The stamps were faint, but the letters were unmistakable. "European arms, NATO supervision," said the intelligence director. "There's no denying that." The silence was deafening. President Traore asked one question. "How much?" The logistics chief swallowed hard. "Estimated street value, $700 million, not including drones, encrypted comms, or sabotage tech." Traore's voice was low, steady. $700 million to destabilize Burkina Faso. He didn't need more evidence. He needed confessions. By midday, 23 warehouses across Ouagadougou had been raided. 17 contained military-grade equipment, mortars, drone parts, sniper scopes, satellite antennas still linked to foreign IPs. At Warehouse 9A, under boxes marked textile surplus, operatives uncovered 4 tons of explosive gel, officially registered as mining supplies from Serbia. But General Sadu, head of defense, squinted at the manifest. "That's not for mines, that's for demolition," he said. "For bringing down buildings," Traore added, eyes narrowed. At Warehouse 14B, 2 men with diplomatic passports were detained. They claimed to be from France. Their names didn't match any flight logs or diplomatic registries. Traore's fists clenched. Bring them in. Isolate. Cross-reference every entry visa. But the breakthrough came later that night, when an older man in a charcoal suit entered the detention wing, Francois Bongo. To most of West Africa, Bongo was untouchable, a towering figure in finance, with generous donations to humanitarian causes and deep ties to European investors. His name was etched in development projects across 4 countries. No one thought he'd ever be arrested. That changed at 7:12 a.m., August 20th. He was seated in a cold steel chair beneath a single light. No cuffs, no guards. Just silence. General Zerbo entered, placing a classified manifest on the desk. Shipment logs, intercepted calls, shell company transfers routed through the Cayman Islands. "Tell us the truth," he said. Bongo leaned forward. His voice was steady. "This isn't about weapons," he said. "It never was." President Traore stepped into the room. "Then what is it about?" Bongo didn't blink. "Timing, power, control." He paused. Then he uttered 4 words that froze the room. "Operation Restore Democracy." The projector flickered to life. Maps, names, ledger screenshots, bank accounts traced to Accra, Paris, Cyprus, Washington, code names, strategic simulations. A draft transition council, ministries assigned, military uniforms tailored, media playbooks ready. The plan wasn't a rumor. It was printed, drafted, practiced. "Who approved this?" Traore asked. Bongo hesitated, then answered, "The talks began at the Sheraton in Accra. Delegates came from Côte d'Ivoire, Kenya, and the EU. The final sign-off came from Washington, just before the AU summit." Traore stared through him. "And if I had fallen?" Bongo looked away. His voice dropped. "A transition government would have been announced within 48 hours. International recognition prearranged. News crews flown in. They even wrote your farewell speech." "And you?" Traore asked coldly. "They promised me Minister of Finance," Bongo replied. "We were all promised something." Just as the gravity of that confession settled, an aide burst into the room holding a secure tablet. It displayed intercepted chatter from 3 nights prior, coded messages referencing Phase 2 operations in Mali and asset deployments in Nigeria. The operation wasn't limited to Burkina Faso. It was continental. The air thickened. Traore didn't speak for several moments. Then he gave a single order. "Verify the satellite links. Scrape every meeting in Accra. I want names, faces, audio, everything." Within the hour, cyber teams were pulling data from a secure cloud server in Cyprus. They retrieved files detailing a media simulation with fake local analysts, Western correspondents, and a crisis PR team ready to frame the coup as popular uprising. Minister Kaur whispered, "They wrote our collapse before firing a single shot." President Traore stood, voice level. "They forgot the one thing you can't buy." Zerbo asked, "What's that?" "Loyalty." By dawn, every African capital would know. This wasn't just a coup stopped. It was a script destroyed. By sunrise, Ouagadougou was no longer just a capital. It was a command post for national resistance. President Ibrahim Traore had already signed a state security override, bypassing bureaucratic clearance. His instruction was simple. Search everything, act immediately. Hesitation is complicity. Interior Minister Isaacor had voiced concern. "Sir, warrants will be required." "No," Traore interrupted, sharp but calm. "We're not waiting for permission to prevent our own collapse." By midday on August 20th, civilian radio channels were monitored, warehouse districts mapped, and surveillance drones launched over the entire capital. Military frequencies were scrambled. Internet traffic from foreign nodes flagged. Every move was logged. Warehouse after warehouse, crate after crate, layer after layer of deceit peeled back. It was no longer a smuggling ring. It was an undeclared war, with theaters, actors, and scripts, all staged on Burkina Faso's soil. And now the government fought on another front, the information war. At 9 a.m. on August 21st, the Ministry of Information issued a directive. All accredited local and foreign media were to assemble at the presidential press hall by midday. No agenda was provided. No leaks were allowed. At 12:01 p.m., President Traore walked into the room alone. No entourage, no flags, no anthem. Behind him, a wall of LED screens lit up. Image by image, the evidence appeared. 48 trucks, each tagged with satellite coordinates. Crates marked relief aid, open to reveal rifles, rocket tubes, and encrypted radios. Weapon stamps from Europe, Cyrillic markings from Eastern factories. Barcodes once scanned under NATO oversight. The murmurs in the room deepened. "This is not humanitarian assistance," Traore said, voice low but deliberate. "This is armed deception." A journalist from CNN stood first. "Mr. President, who is responsible for these shipments?" Traore nodded toward Defense Chief Zerbo, who stepped forward with a classified binder. He read the findings. Post-war Libyan surplus, traced via black market intermediaries. Yemeni RPGs routed through Gulf entities. European-manufactured rifles, sold under non-lethal aid exports. Forged manifests tied to diplomatic dispatch routes. A BBC correspondent followed. "Do you have corroborating evidence?" 17 detainees have given sworn testimony, Traore said. One of them, a financier, confirmed coordination meetings were held in Accra, sanctioned in Paris, and signaled from Washington. A tremor moved through the hall. A reporter from Reuters asked, "And your response to the arrested foreign nationals? Several carry diplomatic credentials." Traore didn't blink. A diplomatic passport is not a license to orchestrate insurgency, nor does it shield anyone from complicity in crimes against sovereignty. Outside the hall, embassies activated red channels. The U.S. and French envoys requested urgent consultations. Economic threats circulated through quiet channels. But Traore didn't flinch. Burkina Faso is not for sale, and neither is our silence. Inside the AU headquarters in Addis Ababa, the Secretary General watched the broadcast in stunned silence. In Lagos, Nairobi, and Kinshasa, local radio stations began replaying Traore's speech every hour. And then the streets began to stir. By late afternoon, hundreds of thousands gathered in Independence Square. Women wore head wraps in national colors. Elderly men sat with folded arms. Teenagers climbed lampposts, waving flags. Children perched on shoulders. They came not just to witness, but to reclaim. Behind the stage, confiscated weapons had been stacked like a metal wall. Grenades, mortars, rocket tubes, jammers, steel casings. An army's worth of firepower, stripped of its mission. General Zerbo leaned over to Traore. "They wanted war," he said. "You're giving them a mirror." Traore adjusted his collar. "I'm giving them a future." Then came the furnace. A roaring cauldron, iron-bellied and ancient, set at the center of the square. Soldiers approached with the first AK-47 seized from Truck 1. Traore lifted it with both hands, then raised it for all to see. "This," he said, "was meant for your children." A hush spread. Not fear, clarity. "They tried to flood our land with war, to make us kill each other, without declaring war. But this is our answer." He turned, walked to the furnace, and fed the weapon into the fire. Metal groaned, sparks flew, and then he spoke the words that would echo far beyond that square. "We will melt their war into our schools." The crowd erupted. Traore continued. "We will use these weapons to build 100 new schools, 50 health clinics, and 1,000 kilometers of irrigation. Our children will drink from wells dug with bullets once meant to kill them." An old woman fell to her knees, sobbing. The furnace blazed on. One by one, rifles vanished into fire. Shells, scopes, grenade tubes, all dissolved. A foreign journalist, stunned, asked, "Is this symbolic?" Traore replied, "This is justice. We're not just dismantling weapons. We're reclaiming our dignity." Another journalist pushed, "How do you ensure this isn't temporary?" He stared into the cameras. "The moment we melted the first rifle, we began the Africa of tomorrow." Behind him, the flames glowed hot. "And if any force, foreign or domestic, tries again, they will not face silence. They will face a nation forged in flame." In the crowd, a child whispered a question. "Captain, what if they try again?" Traore knelt beside her. "Then we melt more guns," he said, "and build more schools." That evening, across Burkina Faso, the story spread. Radios played the speech. Schools gathered to watch the footage. Churches prayed not for vengeance, but for vigilance. The people had not just witnessed a counter-coup. They had seen resistance, intelligence, and honor fused together. And they understood, perhaps for the first time, that Africa would no longer be reconfigured in the dark. If you believe this is what Africa needed all along, say Amen in the comments below. And somewhere in the intelligence vaults, one final name began to surface. The financier who wasn't in Burkina Faso at all. The fallout was immediate and global. As the story of the 48 trucks and the intercepted invasion spread, so too did the shockwaves across foreign capitals. In Washington, cables from the U.S. Embassy in Ouagadougou flashed red. Urgent, diplomatic breach, nationals detained. At the French Foreign Ministry, the mood was darker. One advisor reportedly said, "We underestimated him." By the evening of August 21st, the embassies of France, the United States, and the European Union had all issued requests for private consultations with the Traore administration. Their language was careful, strategic. They avoided the word coup. They used misunderstanding, security incident, and in one case, logistical mishap. But in Africa, the language had changed. In Ghana, the Minister of Defense said, "This should be our template." In Niger, "We stand beside Burkina Faso." In South Africa, "When our children ask what victory looks like, show them this day." In Mali, flags were raised for Ibrahim Traore, and chants rang, "This is not just Burkina Faso, it's Africa rising." International media scrambled to adjust. While CNN and the BBC initially hesitated, by the third press briefing, both acknowledged that unprecedented military coordination had uncovered a transnational arms pipeline. The African Union, silent at first, soon sent envoys to observe. In Addis Ababa, the Secretary General whispered as he watched the live feed, "This is the continent turning its page." Meanwhile, others moved quickly to show solidarity. Moscow issued a formal statement supporting Burkina Faso's right to defend its territorial integrity. Beijing offered to install a cybersecurity firewall and provide drone jamming systems. Caracas referred to the moment as Africa's Bolivarian awakening. But the most telling moment came from Interpol. After receiving documentation from President Traore's legal team, complete with wire transfers, meeting logs, satellite links, and diplomatic inconsistencies, Interpol issued a preliminary inquiry into shell accounts tied to European firms. The system had taken notice, and now the world was being forced to answer a question it had long ignored. If you orchestrate regime change in the shadows, are you still immune from justice? Inside the UN, quiet debates began to brew. The issue wasn't sovereignty, it was precedent. If Burkina Faso could expose a billion-dollar plan and turn it into a school-building campaign, what excuse would any future occupation now have? And in the middle of it all, President Ibrahim Traore said little. He simply issued a statement. Africa is not an experiment. It is not a proxy. It is not for hire. And above all, it is not afraid. The footage of melted rifles had now played in Lagos, Luanda, Kigali, and Nairobi. And everywhere, a phrase began to take hold. Africa is watching. Africa is waking. Africa is rising. But what came next was not a speech, not a sanction, but a declaration that would rewrite a nation's calendar. At 7:00 a.m., on the morning of August 21st, a decree was signed beneath the amber light of the presidential bunker. It bore 7 words etched in bronze. National Awakening and Victory Day. Annual. No fireworks, no parade, just declaration through action. By midday, children gathered in schools across Burkina Faso, not for lessons in mathematics, but in memory. For the first time, a new subject entered the national curriculum, resistance civique. They learned of the 48 trucks, the $700 million plan, the names of the men who betrayed their people, and the courage of those who stopped them without firing a single bullet. And then they learned of the furnace. In Independence Square, now transformed into a living monument, engineers fed weapons into flames. Heat turned steel into liquid promise. The molten metal was cast into school bells, clinic gates, clean water taps, and irrigation valves. President Traore watched silently from a distance. Beside him stood the young girl who had once asked, "Captain, what if they try again?" This time she wore a school uniform and held a polished bell in her hand, cast from the barrel of the first AK-47 seized. Her voice rang out, clear and defiant. Let them come. We will still choose life. In his next address to the nation, Traore made no threat, no boast. Only this. We do not fight for revenge. We do not lead for applause. But let this be known. If they bury our voices, we will rise in song. If they flood our streets, we will raise our schools. And if they try again, we will be ready. The phrase spread like lightning through the continent. We will be ready. In Lomé, it was painted across a community center wall. In Accra, it echoed in church halls. In Johannesburg, students chanted it before debate competitions. In Lagos, artists sculpted it into murals beneath the slogan, Africa Rising, not by weapon, but by will. Because now the truth was undeniable. What happened in Burkina Faso was no longer a national anomaly. It had become a continental precedent. A country had faced down not just armed infiltration, but ideological warfare, economic puppeteering, and foreign-engineered regime change, and had replied with clarity, dignity, and unity. The question now was not, will they try again, but rather, what will Africa choose next? To repeat the cycles of dependency and doubt, or to forge a path where even weapons of war could be melted into bells of knowledge. That path, though narrow, is open now, and its first steps were taken not in opulence or vengeance, but in ash and steel, forged by hands that once trembled and now build. And in that bell's first chime, the one cast from the very rifle meant to kill, a new future began to speak. In the heart of West Africa, a nation stood at the edge of engineered chaos and refused to fall. Burkina Faso didn't win a battle. It rewrote the rules. It proved that when Ibrahim Traore stood between his people and $1 billion plot, what mattered most wasn't firepower, but foresight. Not ambition, but integrity. Not the volume of weapons, but the silence of loyalty that held. And in that silence, something miraculous happened. Africa didn't break. It woke up. This wasn't the story of trucks and crates. It was the story of clarity under pressure, of a people who turned deception into direction, a country who looked at a warehouse of war and chose to build schools instead. And in doing so, they gave us something rare, a model not just for Burkina Faso, but for every nation watching. That resistance does not always mean rebellion, that leadership, when rooted in truth, cannot be bought, that Africa Rising is not a hashtag, it's a horizon. So now, it is your turn. When you hear the next story of instability in Africa, ask yourself, who benefits? Who funds it? Who stands to gain if Africa forgets what it is becoming? Because when Ibrahim Traore held up that first rifle and fed it into the fire, he wasn't burning metal. He was forging memory. And that memory must live, not only in headlines or monuments, but in the hearts of the next generation. If this story sparks something inside you, don't scroll away. Share it. Like it. Let your voice carry this story across Africa. Subscribe, because this is how Africa rises, one truth at a time.